Welcome to the Tell Your Story panel with the HRC. It's obviously very important that it says overtone behind us, so thank you for waiting. We wanted this to be more of a conversation, more of a sort of place for everyone to sort of share and join in and ask any questions. There are no silly questions and there is no unimportant story. And just sort of make this a forum to talk about advocacy and the queer community and the queer experience and what it's like to live in a heteronormative world and how we can move things forward. My name is Augustus Prue and I am an actor and I am here on behalf of the HRC to tell my story.
Hi everyone, my name is Blaze Caudill and I volunteer here locally in Arizona with HRC and I also sat on the Board of Governors, so I represented Arizona to our national board for about 2 years.
La-di-da. My name is Overtone. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jeffrey Self. I am also an actor, and I'm married to this person. And not him, though this is my sweater. And this is my sweater. And I'm an actor and I'm a writer, and I'm also here because of the HRC, and that's all we're saying right now, and then we'll move on.
I think so, yeah. I'm Justin Jones. I am HRC's Youth Ambassador, so I get to travel around the country and tell people my story about my cross intersections of LGBT and African American. So it's pretty interesting. I'm based out of here, out of meetings, and also on this.
Hello, I am Christiana Hammond, and I am the Transgender Outreach Coordinator for HRC Arizona. Anybody that doesn't know what the term transgender means, it simply means that in utero, my brain developed female and my body did some other kind of bullshit. And I am here to spread visibility for the transgender community.
So I think the general plan is we're gonna tell our stories briefly. We won't go on too long, and then we're gonna kind of open it up and just sort of get the conversation going, really, about whatever we want to talk about. So I knew I was gay from the age of about 6. I grew up in London, and I grew up in a very, what is slightly strange about my story is I grew up in a very liberal household. My mum was quite an influential figure in sort of the London fashion scene. She founded London Fashion Week, for instance, and was knighted for doing so. So in theory, a very liberal, progressive family. Thank you very much. You know, I was always a very free kid. I was very in tune with my body and with myself, and would very much experiment, and as kids do, in a very innocent, sort of open way, with friends. I didn't discriminate, it was when I was about 8, I maybe started to realize that this is. Maybe this was something that I needed to be slightly strange feeling about. This is maybe a slightly different thing. Maybe this is something that I was doing that might not be right. And so, being the good kid that I was, I went and told my mum, as you do, as an 8-year-old, in tears, and she basically told me that this was not a good idea and that I shouldn't do this anymore, and that this was just a phase, and it's a phase that everyone goes through, but don't tell anyone and stop doing it immediately. And then I sort of, okay, and then I overheard my parents having a conversation about it that following evening. But my dad, unbeknownst to me, proceeded to say, oh, well, this will, I remember him saying, this will ruin us. That was his, ruin was the word he liked to, he kept saying the word ruin. This will ruin us, this will ruin his life, this will ruin his friendships and our friendships. And because they'd had this conversation in secret, and because my parents were very celebrated, progressive in theory people, it led me to believe that, oh my God, this must be really bad what I've done. This must be genuinely something that I need to be incredibly scared of. And so the next day my dad came to me and he said, you know, you have to stop doing this. You can't do this. This is not a good idea. You have to never tell anyone again. And so I proceeded to slam myself in the closet for the next 15 years. And then I sort of dated women for a long time. I tried to experience life as a straight man, sort of knowing deep down that I had this sort of, what I felt was a dirty secret. And so I tried to make myself as accessible in every other way, as in the best possible way I could, to make up for this horrible thing that I knew would ruin my life and ruin my families and all this sort of good, all this awful stuff. And so I was trying very hard. I was a straight A student. I was in all the theatre stuff. I was in the rugby team. I was in all the choirs. There was nothing I couldn't do for someone else. Everything was about, how can I make this person like me enough so that if they ever found out this horrible, scary thing, it wouldn't have any, or it would mitigate that effect. And it's sort of weird when you, unbeknownst to yourself, grow up with this very destructive behavior pattern that you kind of basically go through your life with. I think that's sort of a shared trait in sort of queer people who have had to make themselves accessible to everyone else, who had to ask permission to be themselves in an environment that everyone else takes for granted. And so when I was doing a film, and I basically fell in love with my other co-star, who was a guy. And it was like the elephant in the room. It was like a whole fucking herd of elephants in the room. You know, it's like the sexual tension was so incredibly impressive that it was only a matter of time until, you know, it all exploded, which it did. And when it did, it was like I'd been watching black and white TV my entire life, and someone had just told me about the IMAX. Do you know what I mean? It was like someone had just explained that 3D cinema existed, and there was all these other things that you could experience. And it was like, you know. So I think the interesting thing in queer stories is for similar to mine, when you sort of went into the closet and then came out the closet, is this understanding that you have this chance to reevaluate your life and the way that you see your life and the way that you see yourselves. If I was wrong about the most intimate part of myself, I feel like one's sexuality is ultimately the sort of the central pillar of who you are. And so if you have been forced to squash this and repress this and make this into something to be ashamed of, you know, if you could do that to yourself, what else could you do? You know, what other things have I just blindly accepted without ever actually asking whether this is something that I ever really agreed with? And so that has been sort of my life to date now, is sort of undoing this baggage, really, and being honest and open and finding a new community for myself and embracing my identity as a queer person and being public in doing it. In order to raise visibility, so that no one ever has to be that little kid again who has to apologize for being themselves, who has to think, oh, you know, I am not enough, I have to make myself whatever everyone else needs me to be because what I am is somehow wrong. And I never want that to happen to anyone else. So that's sort of my story. Very generous.
Oh goodness. My story begins much like a superhero origin story, really. I was dancing around in a ballerina dress when I was 4 years old, and my neighbor, who's my best friend's mother, walks in on us. And although this is a scene that had gone on many, many times, for some reason she was really mad at me that day and told me to take off the dress and that little boys don't wear dresses. And that is when I discovered that people thought I was a little boy. And so from that point on, it became apparent to me that people were treating me differently than I wanted to be treated, and that there was nothing I could do about it. I could insist up and down that I am a girl, and I would get chuckles, or as time went on, I would just get kind of shamed. So I stopped. I stopped telling people, put it in the closet, and I stayed there for a good long time, several decades. I was 45 when I finally came back out. I was married, I had 2 children, a house, a job with the military, and my wife and I had been married for about 10 years, and she had known about it, but our arrangement was basically that, like other men, they fix muscle cars or something. My hobby was to dress up in a prom dress, drink chicory, and watch a rom-com. That's one. And that was the arrangement for a while. But by the time our second kid came around, it became apparent that keeping a secret wasn't just going to affect me, but that it was something I was instilling into the whole family was feeling this sort of weight that comes with that. And when you're trying to teach your kids to be proud of who they are and to be confident and to always be truthful, it's kind of hard to really push that when you're sneaking off and closing the blinds and telling them not to tell people about the visit from Aunt Christina every couple of weeks. So I went into therapy with my wife and very quickly learned that really the only thing that was ever going to make that secret come out would be me coming out. And so that started a series of events that took a couple of years. It took a couple of years of preparing, getting ready, telling one person at a time, parents, friends, family, what was going on, that I would be transitioning into a full-time female from my previous persona. And then it would be off to tell my manager at work and start making a plan for coming out and basically being out all the time, everywhere I go. But we lived in Yuma, Arizona, and it was a very conservative town. I worked for the military, which is a very conservative area. To be working, most everybody there is more red than blue. And although at the time, this was about 2015, Obama was helping out the trans community by putting in some helpful laws or executive orders and policies that would support us at work. And I happened to work in the military, so this is great. I was really feeling like things were kind of almost like fate was telling me that this was the time, finally. But as it got nearer, and we were just starting to ramp into the 2016 election. It was, like I said, it was 2015, and Trump was making his announcement about running. And also about the same time, Caitlyn Jenner had come out, and the word transgender suddenly just exploded across the media. And I was seeing the temperature of water cooler discussions around work, and it was not looking like it would be a very easy thing to do, to come out there. Even though the Obama administration's policies would support me, I would be the one to test them. And my wife and I decided that it would probably be best, safest for us as far as financially and as far as the family having to deal with any sort of discrimination, that I should probably leave for my transition. So, December of 2015, I packed my things and moved 200 miles away to begin my new life. And that's really hard to do. when you have your kids my son was 7 at the time, and my daughter was 2, and spend every day with them and watch them grow and help them grow, and suddenly you have to leave them and not be there every day. It kind of pisses you off, and you kind of have to feel forced into, and have your hand forced into that kind of thing. So I immediately started looking for ways to try to get out there and change things, and that's when I found HRC. I was volunteering for different things with them, and pride parades, different events they put on, and eventually they got me to start telling my story just like I am right now, but in front of state senators and Congress people, and then eventually in the Capitol, Washington D.C., to do the same thing. And the thing that I learned from that, it's not a happy story necessarily, but after I've transitioned, I've become a much stronger, more confident person. And the exact thing I wanted to teach my kids is exactly what's happening with me. And they see that, and I go out and I tell these lawmakers my story, simply that. And it puts in their minds the idea that there's this human out there that is transgender, instead of this mythical thing that people talk about that'll be attacking people in the bathrooms or what have you. And so, I don't know what that noise was, but it's very scary. So basically my whole point in life these days is to use my visibility and my story to try to change minds and try to get the world to kind of get back into the groove it was about 2 years ago. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Again, my name is Blaze Caudill. I grew up very much in what you would call a traditionally Catholic, traditionally Mexican, very machismo family. And so today I'm really excited to be able to kind of share a little bit of my story about finding my own voice within that context, and talking about those intersectionalities between what it is to be Mexican, what it is to be forced into this sense of machismo, and what it is to be a gay man. So as a child, I was the youngest of 4. I remember being very, very little, and my siblings, they would put me in my mom's dress for some odd reason. I don't know why, but I looked fierce. And there's one photo of me in this dress. I'm sitting down, I'm probably 6, and they had put an earring on or something like that. I don't remember. And I remember being happy. I remember thinking it was fun. But then looking back on this photo, feeling like I needed to hide that photo. And I did. Honestly, I think I probably burned it. I don't know where that photo went anymore because I was so ashamed of it. But I found out that the reason that I was so ashamed was because the way that my family was approaching all of this is, clearly I was not necessarily your most masculine child. I wasn't into baseball or football. I was much more into, the Barbies, and they were fun. The way my family really interpreted that through this lens of being Mexican was that I was different, and that I didn't belong where my family was. And that at family gatherings, oh, Blaze is gonna do his thing, and he'll be over there. But I was never really fully accepted into my family because I was not your traditional man. And I think if you're familiar with Mexican culture, machismo is very much a thing. We are expected as men to play into this idea that you're burly and that you have hair and you're building things and you can go do construction. And that was very hard for my family as a whole to deal with, because not only were we buying into this idea of machismo, but my family was extremely, and I mean to this day is extremely traditionally Roman Catholic. Nobody in my family has ever met a gay person really in their whole life before me. They were from a very small town, Bisbee, Arizona, right on the border. Nobody was gay in Bisbee, Arizona at the time. And so growing up, being trained into this idea of what it is to be Mexican and what it is to be a Catholic was extremely difficult. I remember as a child, I would go with my grandmother. I would stay at her house while my mom was a teacher. She went to teach for the day. And one of my tios, one of my uncles, would come in and he would spend the day with my grandma every now and then. And I remember being so scared of what it was to be my feminine self that I would physically actually put myself in my grandmother's closet and hide. I was physically in a closet. Didn't even know that was a term at the time. And I wouldn't wait until my Theo left in order to come back out because I was afraid of what he would do to me. Because I was afraid of this idea of what it was to be this masculine man, because he was so intense about it. And more so, he was intense and forceful about it. As I got older, and it clearly wasn't necessarily, oh, I'm going to grow into being a baseball player and I'm going to grow into being a football player. As I got older, I remember telling my mom one day, looking at her, we were, I think, on our way to church actually, and I remember asking her, Mom, what would you do if one of your kids was gay? That was the hardest question I think I ever had to ask my mom at the very, when I was literally probably 8 or 9. And I remember her answer saying, you know, I'm just gonna hope that they're not. Because my mom, to her, she understood that the world was not a safe place for gay people, and she just didn't know what to do in that instance. So from that moment on, I just knew, okay, this is something that I cannot act on. I cannot interact with my family on. My mother, I cannot tell her. That was extremely difficult and gave me a lot of really intense anxiety as a child, because you have to hide such an intensely authentic part of your being. Which led to, when we had family gatherings again, not being a part of that and feeling so othered and feeling so much like I cannot be a part of making tamales with you because I'm going to be in the kitchen and all the men are going to be outside smoking and they're going to think that I don't belong again. And it was that constant theme of not belonging that really shook me down to my core for a very, very long time. As I got older and turned into my teens, you know, I definitely understood, okay, this isn't going away, this isn't a phase, this is gonna be something that I need to deal with. And credit to my mother, she was actually the first person I came out to. I think Mexicans, we generally, especially sons, we generally are very, very close to our mothers. And especially as the youngest, my job for my whole life will be to take care of my mother when the time comes that she can't work, or when the time comes that she needs my help. That will be my job. And so I remember we were sitting down at the dinner table, and at this point all my siblings had left already. It was just me and my mom. And I remember looking across the way and just being like, I gotta do it. Like, I can't hide this anymore. So I looked at her and I said, Mom, mind you, I had no idea what I was gonna say. This is all off the cuff, so it's very much that. I said, Mom, the cat's out of the bag, I'm bi? And she kind of looked at me for a minute and said, no, you're not. I said, okay, I guess I'm not, but I think I am. So we started on a very, very long conversation about it. I was probably identified as bisexual for maybe a week, and then really came into my own as identifying as a gay man fully. But to my mom's credit, she went out of her way at that point to completely learn what it was like. She went out of her way, she went to all of her friends and asked, okay, I need to find gay people because I need to know what it's like. And I think on this Mother's Day, I did want to share that part of the story because it really is a transformative story about how people can change and how people can really come in once you come out to them. Once you identify as, just kind of as Tiana said, once you identify as a person, I'm not just a gay person, but I'm a person, I'm your son, and you love me. That is really impactful. I want to kind of tell you a little bit more about my grandma too. So Mexicans, we're very, very attached to our grandmothers. And I remember when the very first marriage equality state happened, I remember being at her house. And I remember her watching the news and her looking at me and said, next thing they're gonna want to do is have kids. And she was very mad about it. She was very frustrated. And in my head, it was the same thing as my mom. I knew I could never share that secret with my grandmother anymore. That I was never going to be able to be authentically myself with my grandmother. And it has been very interesting as I've come out and as I've been my authentic self with my family, and especially with my mom. My grandmother now calls my boyfriends, whenever I had boyfriends and things like that, she called them my special friends. And she's really completely come around because, again, I was authentic with her. And I was able to be me. And I was able to go and I kind of just cast off this idea of, I can't be making tamales with my family. I have to be outside smoking. I went away with that and I said, no, you know what? I am going to go make tamales because I like them. I am going to go make tortillas with my grandma because I know that I like them and I want to learn from her. And it doesn't mean that I have to play into this sense of machismo. I can challenge that. I can challenge this idea of what it is to be a man, and instead I can be my own person and I can be my own man. And that was really impactful and very empowering for me as a person. So then once I moved away, I was the first one to move away from my house, or first one to move to Flagstaff from my house. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona for about 5.5 years. And in that time, I really wanted to identify a way for me to get active. I wanted to do more than just change my family, do more than just change my mom. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to change my community. I wanted to have an impact to show people, we are people, we are going to be a part of your community, we can have an impact. So I actually found HRC through that. I was volunteering at a Pride and ended up becoming very active with them. And it's been absolutely amazing. HRC has been such a blessing because it allows me and provides me the tools in which I can empower others to tell their stories, just like we're doing today. And it allows others with tools and resources, so that way they don't have to be that little kid anymore who goes in the closet because it feels coming over, but instead they can be their person, and that's beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Jeffrey, like I said. So I'm from the South. I'm from Georgia, a small town. I grew up there with not necessarily like a super Christian-y family, but a Christian family. I went to a Catholic school for 10 years. And at the end of that, I was going to go to high school, and it was a big school, and I was terrified. And so I begged and convinced my parents to let me homeschool myself. Because I think on some subconscious level, I knew at the time that it was just not going to go great if I were to actually be in a real social setting. And so I did the cowardly thing of keeping myself from it. But what inevitably ended up happening is by 17, I decided to run away from home and moved to New York City, where I lived for a long time. And I feel like what I did really well there and that really sort of saved me was I built my own family, which I think is something that queer people do so well, and that I think is something that, as a queer person who's getting older, I feel like is a responsibility for everybody to help young people form those families that you don't necessarily have in a place like a small town in Georgia. And I think that by doing that, you get a depiction of what your life could be. Because I think my big thing when I was growing up was I didn't have anything to look at and compare what the future could even be like. So I didn't really know what would happen after 18. I hoped I would leave my hometown, but I didn't know if that was a thing. I assumed I would just be an alcoholic who works at the community theater, and now I'm an alcoholic who works in LA, so it's very similar. So I think that I think that for me the biggest takeaway from growing up as a queer person in the past decade has been realizing the importance of building queer families and communities around yourself.
So these stories are amazing. As you can tell, I'm younger of the group. Not saying you're old.
Okay.
Not saying you're old, but happy Mother's Day to the mothers out here.
Yes, and happy Mother's Day to you.
And the reason I chose to go last is because unfortunately I lost my mom at 2, so it's always hard on this day. And just hearing y'all stories, I was I wish she could be here with me. So I grew up in Detroit, and in Detroit, it's a whole different dynamic than Arizona. In Detroit, I grew up with my sister and my grandmother, and we developed a very close bond. And growing up, I always told, like, I have to be a masculine man, and, like, you know, you never look inside of a lady's purse, and, you know, you hold the door for a woman. And as I got older, I was just like, this is not me. This is definitely not me. And it was kind of an out-of-body experience when, as I was growing up, when I watched my uncle. He was an openly gay man. He fought for HIV and AIDS, you know, just, you know, equality in hospitals because he wasn't getting properly treated. So, as growing up, later on he passed away, unfortunately due to complications. And I kind of asked around Bush, like, hey, you know, how did he pass away? Because I didn't understand it. And they was like, oh, he died because he got that gay disease. And I was like, what does it mean to be gay? And like, I kind of knew what it was, but I kind of didn't know what it was. Sorry. And as I'm like dwelling on the fact that I lost him, I'm also questioning myself. And I finally watched a show called The Real World on MTV, and I fell in love with this guy named JD. Still in love with him, if y'all find him. But I knew that I was gay or queer or whatever you want to call me. And I was trying to figure out myself, figure out my truth. And I was telling my friends, I was like, I think I might be gay. And they were like, oh, this is just a phase, or haha, you're being funny. And I was just like, no. And I finally watched Ellen, which she was my inspiration at the time. And like, I'm literally like in my grandma's room, hiding the TV, having to close my eyes so she can't see it. And I'm like, I'm watching this for a little bit, and I would give her back the TV so she could watch her church programming. Finally, I went to school one day, and word got out. It spread like wildfire. Like, oh, maybe he is because I don't know, he does gay things. I don't know. I was never like hiding who I was. I couldn't do it. So that's how I found my truth. But then word spread to my family, and people were asking me like, "Oh, that's so gay of you." And it's one thing hearing it from your friends, but it's another thing hearing from your family. So I decided to run away from home. I ran away from the furthest place from Detroit as possible, and I needed some heat, so I came to Arizona. When I came out here with some cousins, and I told them immediately, and they were like, oh, you're fine just the way you are, because they're the children of my uncle, which is all reflective. So after I told them, they was like, well, you're still going to be you, we're going to give you a couple years to get your high school done, and then you have to figure it out on your own. After I got done with high school, I didn't know what I was going to do. I became homeless. And during that time of being homeless, I found me a girlfriend, which I only dated her for housing, but don't tell her that. But she was just like, Justin, there's something off about you. Like, you don't want me every day, you want me every once in a while. It's just something off. She brought me to this place called 110. And she was like, I think you belong here. You're just like these people over here. And 110 is an LGBT youth center. And I was just like, are you trying to tell me anything? And she was like, I think you just need to tell yourself that. After a while, I told her I identify as gay. And I started volunteering more at 110. I love 110, I still go to 110. And as I used to volunteer there, I found all these youth that have similar stories to me, or some similar to you, and similar to you. And some probably others here too. But it was incredible, and I was like, I need to be more outspoken. I don't want anyone to do the same thing I did. I don't want no one to hide who they are from anyone or why. And now I speak to my family, we're more comfortable now. And then 110 helped me find HRC, or HRC helped me find 110. It was just a match made in heaven. And now I get to go around the country and tell people my story, this story. And it's amazing. And that's all. Thank you.
Does anyone else have anything they want on a shirt while we're all sitting here. Don't be shy.
I have a question for you about HRC and how things people who don't work for the HRC or don't work in government can do to be involved as a citizen.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, HRC is actually a really outstanding organization because of the way that we structure the organization. So, I actually am just a volunteer with HRC. I don't get paid at all. I just do it because I have a good time. HRC has our federal level, which is very much housed in DC, but then every single state, because we know that each state and each city is unique, and each state and each city has unique problems, unique cultures, unique people, and needs to approach how we're solving and working towards full equality in a different way. So in Arizona, for example, we have our Human Rights Campaign Arizona, where we have our steering committee based in Phoenix, but takes care of the entire state, and we have volunteers throughout the whole state who go out and work at Prides, for example, march in Prides, who go out and volunteer in the community. So every Martin Luther King Jr. Day, for example, as a steering committee, we get together and just volunteer at a local nonprofit to make sure that we are out in the community and being very active and giving back to the community that gives us so much as well. So if you want to be involved, if you want to make a difference, and if you want to make sure that we are leaving a legacy of equality for our children and for the people that come after us, I really would invite you to come and volunteer with us. We have some volunteer cards that we'll be passing around as well that you can sign up to volunteer wherever you are. So if you're from Arizona, we'd love to have you volunteer with us. If you're from California, there are many, many steering committees. There's actually 3 in California. So depending on where you're at in California, you can volunteer with them. There's steering committees throughout the whole country, so we're definitely wanting to encourage that. So fill out one of our cards and we'll make sure that we get you connected to volunteer work that way as well.
Great. Are there other questions or anything?
Let's switch mics. Coming over.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm from Phoenix. I identify as queer. And I just have a question for y'all. What can we do as a society to really amplify the voices of trans people of color that are living on the streets and people that have died and they don't have any publicity in the media? What is HRC doing to really amplify those deaths that go unspoken about?
That's a great question. Who wants to take that one?
So yeah, what she just said is absolutely a problem that we have these days. For instance, last year we had 28 trans people murdered violently, most of which were trans people of color. This year we're about halfway through, and we're at 8, which is an improvement, but this is not necessarily something to celebrate. And HRC does what they can to get those numbers out. They publish them on their own website. They get them to every time one happens, they go out to that town or that city and have a vigil. They get it to the newspaper. They make sure that it can be publicized, but it's still not publicized enough. And it's up to us, really, to make sure that when these kind of things happen, that we point it out, that we talk about it, because it's not an epidemic, but it's kind of feels like it's one, especially in the last few years. Like I said, this year seems to be better, and cross our fingers that it doesn't approach the numbers that it has been, but it had been climbing for the last 3 years. And it's the climate is what it is, and the way we can change it, really, feet on the ground, is to vote, of course, for LGBT-friendly politicians, to shop at places that the HRC has what's called the Corporate Equality Index, and we rate, like the NRA rates politicians, we rate companies that have LGBT inclusive policies. And so there's hundreds of them that have gotten to 100%, but there's thousands of companies out there, and if we vote with our pocketbooks, people listen.
And I think one thing I would add too, and you're in Phoenix, you said?
Yeah.
So I would highly encourage, if you're in Phoenix, please do come to the Transgender Day of Remembrance, so you can actually hear all of the names being read. Because I think that's so impactful, is being able to hear different people's names, recognizing that they were people as well, so that way you can change it from the ground up. I think that in the past, we haven't had as much participation as I think would be great, and so being able to invite your friends and being able to bring them out so that way they can experience it for themselves is really impactful as well.
I have a question for you guys. There seems to be a disconnect. As someone who is an immigrant to this country, I've only been here 5 years, I sort of have a relatively fresh perspective on things. It's not the culture I grew up in, so I'm able to see it with new eyes in many ways. I read there was a piece the other day. There was a poll taken by the PRI Institute the other day that says 70% of Americans are very much in favor of workplace discrimination for the LGBT community, Q community. Why? I think a lot of the issue here is that the rhetoric that is espoused by politicians, it seems to be lost on the population. Most of the population, I think, already believe that these protections are already in place. But the truth is that it is legal federally to fire a queer person in 50 states. There is not one state where it is a federal legal protection to do so. There are state protections, but you can be fired as a federal employee in all 50 states. So I don't know that most people know that it's that bad. How do we, as a community, right here we're kind of preaching to the choir. We are. This is an educated. You seem to be educated, proactive, engaged people. How do we get the message out that this is not the case? How do we mobilize?
I want to say after marriage equality, I think we kind of stopped focusing on things like workplace discrimination. We need to work more on that. So we need to mobilize, we need to organize, and we definitely need to get out there. Again, we vote with our pockets, but again, we also have to get politicians who want to work for us. And I think with this new administration, there's just so much more hatred out there, and so much just being more outspoken. So mobilize and organize, I think that's very good.
One thing I did want to point out is that for a short while it was not legal if you were a federal employee to be fired for sexual or gender discrimination, but that has been reversed. And so this is something we need to solidify by voting for people that support the Equality Act, which is something that HRC is pushing really hard on, which will update the Civil Rights Act from 1964 to include gender identity and sexual preference. And yes, you can. You can actually go to the HRC website and you can look up the politicians that do support that. And here in Arizona, actually, we have a Senate race that's coming up, and we have she's LGBT herself. Kristen Sinema is running for Senate to replace Jeff Flake, who is retiring. And it's something we're really working hard on this year.
And I think to piggyback off of that a little bit, we all really like going to Prides. Prides are fun, right? But use Pride as a way to mobilize as well. So I am in charge of all the Prides for HRC throughout the whole state of Arizona, and it's a great opportunity for you to be able to volunteer and for you to be those feet on the ground, to be those people who are recruiting people to go knock on doors for your local elected officials. The strategy in Arizona for a long time was to go city by city to add protections for LGBTQ Arizonans, and we were successful in a couple cities. So we were successful in Tempe, we were successful in Phoenix, we were successful in Flagstaff, and we were successful in Tucson. Outside of those 4 cities, you can be fired, or you can lose your housing, or you can be discriminated against for being who you are and loving who you are. And so by being able to be active, voting for your local officials, so not just your federal senators, not just your members of Congress, but also your city council members. They make a big difference in your cities. And so I want to encourage you all to really be active, be attentive. I know it's tiring, but you need to be attentive to what is going on in your local communities, because that is how we're going to shift that dial. That is how we're going to make sure that we have protections where you can be who you are, where you work, where you play, and where you live.
Anyone in the audience want to either a question, or is there a story, or is there anything? Yeah?
My name's Zach. I'm from down in downtown Phoenix. Thank you guys for being here and speaking with us today. I spend a good majority of my work and my week working with the elderly population, so people that are about 65 and above. My question is, how does the HRC address the needs of that population that might be more of a vulnerable population, especially when it comes to people that are LGBT but might not feel safe in that kind of environment?
So the HRC does a lot of really great work at the federal level to identify different populations, very diverse populations, and very much diverse vulnerable populations. So I definitely want to, before anything, invite you to visit hrc.org to look at the different populations that we do focus on and how we're addressing the needs of every single population, very unique needs. When it comes to the elderly population, I think that's a really interesting demographic that a lot of organizations and a lot of different people really unfortunately ignore. I think that there isn't enough work being done by most organizations to address that. I will say here locally what we do though, and I'm really proud of this, is that we support a lot of local smaller organizations, smaller chapters if you will, of people who are elderly and who want to do pride type activities or who want to be active in their communities. So one example, there's a group in Southern Arizona based out of Tucson that specifically focuses on senior pride. So it's called Senior Pride, and they provide resources, they provide a pride festival, they provide a lot of different opportunities for people who are older to address their needs. I think that we also, at the federal level, when it comes to people who are elderly, there is a lot of healthcare needs that happen. And so at the federal level, what we also do is we actually have the Healthcare Equality Index. And so that is provided for people to look at different hospitals or hospital networks or doctors sometimes even, that will make sure that they are protecting people who are identified as LGBTQ. So for people who are elderly and needing that support, we do have those resources available as well.
Anyone? Come on. Let's talk about queer spaces. Let's talk about what is the future of. I think the important thing for me in identifying as a queer person was, again, to touch on what Jeffrey said, is finding that sense of community. And you know, a large way to do that is our gay bars. But unfortunately, because of, you know, Grindr and stuff like this, these sort of safe, queer spaces are less and less prevalent now. What do you think we can do to seek out community, and is the HRC a tool and a resource to help do that?
So I'm 23, and like, yeah, gay bars are fun and all, but there's not great.
They really are.
But I don't want to seem like I'm 20 and I go to gay bars. I meet at a space again at 1 and 10, and they help youth up to 24. But my goal is to create a space that's something like that's in the middle of ages, like 24 and above. So I believe if we find our own community, we have to make our own space. There's a lot of tea houses I go to and just get tea and talk over brunch, and I love getting brunch. You should take me out for brunch. But anyway,
I love brunch. Who doesn't love brunch?
Anyone wants to take me to brunch after this? Yeah. But yeah, definitely we have to create our own spaces sometimes, and sometimes like not to take over someone else's space, but try to just have a space and make our own.
A little bit ago, Tiana and Justin and I were all talking about this kind of movement within the gay community, especially brought on by Grindr, I think, unfortunately, othering communities. So this idea of no fats, no femmes, no Asians, that kind of thing, which is absolutely repulsive. And I think, unfortunately, within the gay community, we've fostered that and we've accepted it as being the norm. And I think that, to address your question, I think that we need to, first and foremost, call out our friends and say, no, that's not okay. It's not okay to say, oh, I'm just not into Asians. No, you're writing off an entire group of people who are beautiful people, who are amazing, just because you don't think that that's your type. And I think that the fact that Grindr allows you to do that, from my understanding, is causing that, and it's encouraging it. So I think that, first and foremost, we need to start with our personal selves, identifying that we intrinsically do have a bias, and you need to address your own bias personally, and then going out to your next circle, talking to your friends and saying, look, we need to look at our friend circle. What groups aren't in our friend circle? How can we bring those groups into our friend circle and being very intentional about it? Not saying, oh, I need a token black person in our friend group. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is you do need to be intentional about who you're inviting and making sure that your spaces within even your friend group are very open. I think that when it comes to HRC's work, we, beyond just our political work and beyond our community activism, we want to be a social hub for people. And so I think one thing that we are planning now is hosting actually monthly socials at different gay bars or different spaces, not even just gay bars, where people can come and join and really interact and engage with people that they might not otherwise see. So I think that's one way that we can do that, and also by supporting other local organizations who address diverse population. So specifically talking about 1 in 10, or in Arizona we also have a group called Trans Queer Pueblo, who represents a really great population, and we need to make sure that we're identifying and really encouraging that group and bringing them into our larger conversation about everything.
What's up? It's time to end. Unless someone has another question, we are going to wrap it up there. Do we have any final thoughts that we'd like to say? If you guys haven't visited the Cultural Hub, it's fabulous. And there's everything there from Planned Parenthood to the a whole gamut, everyone who's represented here today. The ACLU also has a post there. There's resources for everything you may want to ask but haven't been able to hear. Please go there. You know, we will be there throughout. Is there anything you guys would like to add?
I wanted to also say thank you to Overtone for sponsoring this talk. I really do appreciate that. I think this space is really important for us to have these sorts of conversations where it's very open, forum-style conversations. So I do appreciate that a lot. And then I also want to add too, we do have volunteer sheets here already. So if you are interested in your move to make a difference in your community, please do come up and talk with us. We have a lot of resources for you, and we're definitely happy to have you in our family.
Thanks, guys. Have a great weekend.